is it's seamless. The end user doesn't know whether or not any data is only on disk, if it's also backed up on tape, if it's only on tape, other than the way we've logically arranged our file system. But it's completely transparent to the end user. So when Storage Manager detects a request to open a file or copy a file, it automatically goes and grabs the tape in the robot because it knows where everything is, and it brings those disk blocks back onto disk, making them accessible for editing and suitable for use in high bandwidth applications like Final Cut. So it's all completely managed within the context of the file system. That's what really makes it unique. Any other solution you get to back up this volume of data to LTO is going to require a backup window, is not going to manage bandwidth appropriately, so you're not dropping frames while data is moving around. It's basically not going to give you near the same flexibility that you get with Storage Manager backing up and archiving to the LTO. So it's all handled within Storage Manager, the control of the robot, the movement of the data, and it's policy driven. So you have rules that you set up for Storage Manager to move data onto tape and off of tape, and how to whether or not to drop it from disk, and you apply those rules to different directories in your file system, and it just follows them.
Andy, please mention the value of the vault. I think the vault is one of the kind of bonus aspects of the design and is very, very valuable in managing your data.
Good point. Okay, so we've licensed the ability to vault our data, which means that we can remove tapes with data that the system knows about and remembers where every block of data is on these tapes, and we're able to send them off-site. So that lets us do two things. That lets us keep a copy of our archived content in a safe place, and it lets us keep a copy of the stuff that we maintain a redundancy for online in a safe place as well. So even though the tapes have been removed from the system and they're just sitting on a shelf in their LTO plastic case, they're still part of the file system. We've got when we started out, we had a file system that over time we wanted to change the fundamental structure of the file system, so we essentially retired it. And that file system now exists only, there's a token, one RAID LUN. It needs at least one to exist, but there's one little token LUN for this file system, and the entire 21 terabyte file system exists offline outside the robot on a shelf in a safe location. So we actually have an entire file system that we've retired, but we still have access to it any time. A couple weeks ago, we needed to get at an old file to get a clean shot that didn't have some music mixed into it. So I was able to go back to this 4-year-old data on a file system that we don't even mount on clients anymore, and retrieve this one file from one tape that hadn't been used in years. So it's really really robust in terms of its ability to store stuff offline and in deep archive like that.
That helped.
Okay, and I guess that was specifically for RLTV. Did the guys at BYU have any experience with LTO?
We do. This is John Call again. The real synergy at our institution came from the marriage between the project of the television studio, Russell Merrill, and what the enterprise people were doing with their student databases and financial databases. See, they have already an LTO library that we're now piggybacking on, and we have been on the fence now for a long time looking at this wonderful product that Quantum has, but having not yet bit the bullet and purchased it. So the way that we gain access to the LTO tapes is much similar to what RLTV is doing, but in a bit more manual fashion. And it depends on who you talk to over here. I know Travis would say he actually prefers that a little bit because it gives us a little bit more thought before we back up, especially in the case where we have a lot of transient student employment. They're not often up to speed on the policy about what files to back up and what files not to back up. So at some point we'll cross that bridge, but we love the fact that just like RLTV, we can take our finished products, involve them, actually remove them from the library. We have occasion to ship those, as I said, geographically all around the world. We routinely ship those up to the mainland in Utah, and we can pull them back, and we can use them back. We can use the files on those tapes years and years later.
Now, there's a couple questions here coming at this from a different direction, but when you say tapeless these days, obviously a lot of people do think of tapeless acquisition and the way we're moving to cameras that record in file-based formats rather than two-tape. So we've got some people who are wondering. I'm going to read you one of the questions because he says, I'm working with a lot of production companies doing shows for cable networks. They shoot, edit, and finish shows on a couple of days in their office. They need to archive the original footage. Previously, to date, they would store videotapes in the tape library, but I want to know how your system works for archiving video to LTO tape while incorporating the original footage metadata, say from P2 or S/S cards, into a searchable database with small preview videos that can be seen instantly without having to go back to the LTO tapes. Is that something that you can do today? Maintain metadata from, say, the P2 format all the way through to long-term storage?
Andy, you want to answer that?
Sure. I'll take a stab at it. It's not something that we do regularly in our workflow, but I do know that that the P2 metadata, and I believe the same is true for the XDCAM card-based metadata. Well, I guess it doesn't matter. The XDCAM metadata. Both of those both of those formats, metadata is readable by, and at least in the case of Final Cut Pro, in log and transfer, that metadata is appended to the actual file, the QuickTime file itself, and that metadata is also readable by Final Cut Server. So as I can't speak in too great a detail because I haven't built it, but as far as I know, you can build a workflow where you're doing log and transfer from P2 or XDCAM to probably to ProRes, because Apple doesn't handle those natively when it does log and transfer. But you would have your editing format with the metadata carried over from the cards and stored in a Final Cut Server database, and that makes proxies that you can search and view against. And in our case, we've structured it so that given the right input, the system will automatically cycle the high resolution stuff off to LTO via Storage Manager. So such a system could be built. I can't claim that we've done exactly that because a lot of our stuff is still acquired in the field via tape, or it'll be an acquisition from a production company that handled the initial post themselves, and we might get a drive with a media managed Final Cut project on it. But as far as I know, it is possible to have the metadata from P2 and XDCAM carry into the file and ultimately into a Final Cut Server content base that is searchable and has proxies and so on.
Okay. BYU folks, do you have any experience with trying to maintain metadata all the way from a solid state card to the archive?
We haven't had a need to do that yet. We know we could if we needed to.
Mm-hmm.
But the reality that we have is a lot of our tapeless workflow is kind of direct capture straight into Final Cut Pro. So we have a couple things that captured SNS cards or they're card-based in the cameras, but the vast majority of it's still capturing straight into one of our Final Cut Pro machines from, we have fiber drops all over campus, so it's just hook a camera into a fiber, open up Final Cut, and hit capture. That's the bulk of ours.
Okay.
Let me throw in something from RLTV, Jimmy Peebles. I just want to say what this question really addresses is one of the real bears of content acquisition and management, and that is the metadata management. And we have found that it's still a process that requires a fair amount of human intervention to create a lot of value out of it. And we're still on the cusp of truly automated metadata, but it is something very desirable. And of course, one of the wonderful things about these new cards is that they are capturing a lot of interesting metadata. But we found that this is one area where the discipline of the producers and the editors is still required to truly address the issue of adding all that content to the metadata side to make the video really searchable and versatile. So it's not a problem that's easily solved, and it still requires a fair amount of human intervention to manage it at this point.
Okay. We've got a question. I think it was for the BYU guys about the ADDO cards. This one says, you mentioned that all connections and hardware were generic, yet you also mentioned that your IT specialist wrote code for the ADDO cards. Could you clarify exactly what's going on there?
Yeah, sure. As we were researching the components that were necessary to connect our Final Cut workstations to our IBM storage, and the reason we have IBM storage, as I alluded to a bit earlier, was that our student databases and financial and otherwise have been working very well with IBM. So the way to make that all work and to have it supported in case of an issue was to use an ATTO fiber channel HBA. We did not write any specialized software, nothing of that nature. It's simply the drivers that are provided from the ATTO website. But it is a particular marriage between that brand of HBA and our brand of storage in the back end. The benefit of having that particular HBA ATTO is that it has multi-pathing, it has multi-pathing abilities and active pathing. So we've tested our system by pulling fiber optic connections out of servers, that is editing workstations, and reconnecting them, failing metadata controllers, and there's no drop frames. It's a seamless failure with no single point of failure.
Okay.
Does that clarify it?
I think that clarifies it a bit. If the person who asked the question is still at their keyboard, they can punch in a follow-up if they want, and we'll see if we can get to it. There's a few questions here about how media asset management happens. Somebody wants to know if RLTV is using Final Cut Server for MAM. Somebody else is curious about how hard it is to integrate storage management software with asset management software. I guess if could both of you address a little bit how media asset management works in this system, where it takes place, and how it works with the other parts of storage management?
Sure. This is Andy from RLTV. I'll go first. We are using Final Cut Server in conjunction with Storage Manager, and the way it works is it's pretty straightforward. Final Cut Server has the ability to archive the main media behind a given asset, and so the way Final Cut Server is structured is you've got the raw content, and that is they call it the primary representation. And then from that, you've got a record in the database that contains all the metadata information. You've got a few proxy files, a couple still images, and a proxy video in the case of any video content. And that's kept separate from the main file that it's all derived from. And that main file tends to be the big data. That's the full bandwidth stuff. So the archive function in Final Cut Server essentially copies that big data from its original location to a location defined in Final Cut Server as an archive device. And in our case, that archive device is just another part of the same file system that has a policy attached